Hello and welcome to the Love Your Library podcast. I'm your host, Hattie Dulac, and in this episode, I'm joined by travel writer and novelist Annabelle Thorpe, where we talk about her latest book, The Enemy of Love. Set in Italy during the Second World War, the book takes a look at how occupation affected close-knit communities and how love can flourish even in the most unexpected places. So I spoke with Annabelle all about her background in travel writing, what it takes to write about strong female characters in historical novels, and, of course, why she loves libraries. Hi, Annabelle. Welcome to Love Your Library. It's so lovely to have you here.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
So, we're delighted to have you here. Would you please tell us a little bit about the book?
Yes, so my book is called The Enemy of Love, and it's set in Umbria in Italy in 1943 at the time of the armistice, when Italy, who had been fighting alongside the Nazis, the war was going so badly for them, so disastrously, that Mussolini, who was their leader at the time, got ousted, and the powers that came in afterwards decided to sign an armistice and join the Allies. So they effectively swapped sides in the middle of the war. And it's about two families who live in Amatino in Umbria, and what happens to them during this incredibly difficult period and their lives, and, you know, the developments that come after the armistice, the biggest one of which is that the Germans come in and sort of take over their town.
And the characters in this book are so connected. It seems like such a lovely community. Did you know much about this period of history and the people living in those situations before you started the book? Was it always something you wanted to write about?
Not really. I mean, I think I like to write about I like my characters in set them against a dramatic backdrop. And then I'm really interested to see how characters behave when they're put in in extremis, in situations that are tremendously difficult. And I think in wartime, I think what we've all been through in the last couple of years with the pandemic, it's not the same as a war, but that sense of just something altered about our lives every day, all the time, is something that just impacts hugely on how people are. So that's something that appeals to me about writing. But in terms of the history, I was, as I think with a lot of people, I didn't know a huge amount about Italy's, role in the war. We all get taught about Germany, and rightly so. So I did a lot of research and a lot of reading, and just found it absolutely fascinating. We all love Italy so much. So, such a popular destination for British people. And yet I think really we don't really have a great understanding of their past.
Yeah, I think you're completely right. For me, this was a really great access point, actually, for not just a period of history that I don't know much about, because the period we're all quite educated about usually, but this specific kind of location and the way it affected this area is not a story that's often told, I think. So it was really, really nice to see it done like that.
I think that's the thing. If you are writing about war or something like that, take it down to a personal level, just a family or two families, and look at all the myriad ways that affects them, from, the sons going off to war to people coming back injured, different relationships, all of that kind of thing. I think that's how to really understand the impact, is to focus very tightly on a kind of group of people. And then you really become emotionally involved with them, and you care about them, which, I think is an imperative part of a book like this.
And it's called The Enemy of Love. And I kind of went into it expecting this kind of like great love story. And it does have the love element, but I think it seemed to have so much more. It was a lot of telling of that human story and the almost like the love of a community, alongside the character relationship that we see blossom during the book as well. Was that something that was important to you to write about? Was it conscious or unconscious?
No, I think I always wanted to have Sophie and Giorgio at the heart, and their sort of love story. But I'm fascinated by all the other different type of relationships and all the other different types of love that we can have in our lives, whether that's for your family members or your friends or people that are kind of like your grandma but actually aren't. all those kind of relationships are so important in our lives. And in some ways, I think they're almost more interesting than the classic love affair as well. So I think, you want that at the heart of a book. You want to root for that couple. You want them to get together. But I think, there are the other sort of side relationships that perhaps, you read them and you go, yeah, no, I've got a friendship like that. Or, I've got someone like that in my life. So that's why they are really important to me.
And you sort of mentioned about loving getting stuck into the historical research with this one. So what kind of thing did that involve? Did you go and visit this kind of area?
Well, this is the great thing about setting my books abroad, is that I always have to take a trip to go and do some research. So I did. I've been out twice to Umbria, and the second time I stayed actually in Orvieto. So I've fictionalized it. So it's called Amatino in the book, but it's based on Orvieto. So I had 5 days there, which was fantastic. And they have these tunnels as in the book, and I did a tour of the tunnels, and there's nothing like actually being somewhere to really get under the skin of a place. So I did a lot of that. And also these days, YouTube is amazing. So there's footage of battles taking place in the war and Mussolini meeting Hitler, and it's all there. You can see it, which is invaluable as a writer, because to actually see things as well as read about them really gives an added depth, I think.
And I do think that kind of visual description came across really well in your writing, because one thing that when I was reading it, I kept thinking, oh my goodness, the descriptions of food were so strong and so present on every single page. You'd be reading about, I don't know, the gathering after a funeral, and the pages were laden with all these like gorgeous descriptions. Obviously, the hub of the plot is around the restaurant that the characters run together. So I wonder whether food was something that almost needed to be that prominent in the novel. Are you a big foodie? Was that a really intentional thing?
Yeah, I am quite a foodie. And I think also, in Italy, food is prized almost above everything else. I was chatting to someone, I was out there, and she said, my family and I get together for Sunday lunch, and most of the conversation is where we will be getting the ingredients for next week's Sunday lunch. So, they are, huge foodies. And I think the slight issue I had was that obviously in the war, there were so many shortages and people didn't have very much food. And I think actually out in the countryside, people had more than in the cities, because they would have had the fruit and vegetables that they could grow and things like that. So I sort of had to find ways that they could get hold of food. But I think also from a writing point of view, meals are a fantastic way to bring your characters together and have a conversation and move things along, and and sort of just go, again, those little interactions between people, just a glance across the table or somebody acting up a little bit. So for me, they're like set pieces when I get all my characters together, and that's when things kind of, really move along.
I suppose it's a great way to show the difference in characters as well, the way they behave around food.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's one of the great bonds in the book between Sophia and Giorgio. They're both these amazing cooks. And also I wanted to have strong female characters in my book. And again, in Italy in the 1940s, life was very different for women. And it was certainly under Mussolini in the 20s and 30s, it was to be a housewife and mother, and that was it. But I sort of felt actually if you were a very talented cook, which Eleanor, the nonna, the elderly figure, was kind of famous for her cookery, and Sophia is a very talented cook as well. I sort of thought actually that was a sort of a job or a talent that would allow them to perhaps have more of an independent life than would be normal at that time. So it was very useful in that way as well.
I mean, I was going to ask you about the women in the book, actually, because as you say, the setting and the context necessitates these like traditional gender roles. And I think the two sort of main characters, Elena and Sophia, are very strong women, clearly, and they're almost resistant to these things. But you're right, within that kind of vocation, it gives them agency within those gender roles, I think, which is nice.
Exactly. And I think this is because on the one hand, you want to be accurate about the social mores of the time. And I wanted to be accurate about the fact that there wasn't much food. And in the sequel, which I'm just writing now, there's even less food because, life just got harder. Yeah, so I think it's a balance between appreciating how society was at the time, but also, I am writing for a contemporary audience. And there would have been women who wanted to be more independent. And so I think it's about treading that line between not making it entirely unrealistic, where they're off running the country, but also making them engaging, and also, that they have battles to fight, that they take the reader along with them. They want Sophia to run the restaurant, and they want Eleanor to still be a force in the town. So it's a way of engaging the reader as well, I think.
And it's so contrasted still to the, I think the way that the women in the book take the lead in these environments, in their kind of like domestic space, is really different from the way that the, German occupiers, for example, exert their power as kind of very like masculine energy, taking on the town and stuff like that.
And I think the other thing is that, war, as it did in this country, war did afford women sort of increased independence and different roles and whatever, because so many men were away fighting, that they did step into all sorts of roles and situations that they would never have done before. So the fact that happened, again, helped me position Sophia in perhaps more of a forward role than she would otherwise have had.
Yeah, definitely. And it gives you someone to root for, which is always really nice. So listeners may know you for your travel writing, and you sort of mentioned the ability to go to all the places that you write your books about. I noticed that your previous two have been set in Croatia and Marrakesh. So how do you think your background in travel writing has really influenced your fiction? Is it more than the setting, or is it that you just have this compulsion to write things in that way?
I think it has been really helpful, because I think, so I've been a travel journalist for over 20 years. And when you travel to write a piece, you experience it in a very different way. And I often feel it's almost like you're sort of peeking behind the curtain. You go and talk to tourist board people, and I have a hotel tour where I peek round the back of, like, almost like off stage, where you see a different side of hotels, and you really get under the surface of a place because you're seeing it from a different perspective. And that was something that I really have wanted to bring in all my books, is to really get under the surface of somewhere and to show it in all the sort of positive, amazing side, but also the reality of it as well. So my second book, Marrakesh, which is a city I adore, but is very full on and can be quite overwhelming. And, I wanted to show that side, as well as it's incredibly exotic and lovely. And so I think that sense of digging down to really understand a place and its culture and the traditions of the people that live in it, that's something that I guess honed over the years of being a travel writer, and then brought that to my books, hopefully.
I was going to say, it certainly comes across. So I think those details are really important in setting the scene. One thing to ask then is what was the transition like from travel writing to fiction? What made you take that step?
Well, it was a very long, very slow transition. So I always wanted to write novels. Like, I've always wanted to write books since I was a little girl. And I started in journalism really as a way to, I thought, in my 20s, to sort of make a living while I was trying to get my book published. So it took me the best part of 15 years to, of writing. I mean, I finally got an agent, I think, about early 40s. So it was something that I always wanted to do. But it's, when you're working full time, it's tremendously hard to find the time to write a book. So, there were several years where I would just not do anything at all. And then I think, it just comes a time where you're like, right, I'm really going to focus on this and try and get an agent. And I always think, once you've got an agent, and I have the most fantastic agent, you've got someone on your team, and it's no longer just you. Yeah. And you've got someone who's, your cheerleader, and will help you navigate into the industry. So yes, it was a long transition.
Oh, well worth it, I hope.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I'm phenomenally fortunate to be doing what I always wanted to.
It's a brilliant thing to be able to pursue your passion, I think. So what kind of books do you like to read? Is historical fiction your bag, or anything and everything else?
All things, really. I mean, I do like to read books often by sort of foreign authors, and also books that are set in other places, because I really think you can travel through fiction. And I found that really helpful in the pandemic. I love New York, haven't been able to get to New York for years, and I found a book called The Rules of Civility by Amor Towles, which is kind of like it's a bit F. Scott Fitzgerald. It's all very sort of glamorous New York, and it just made me feel like I was there. It was, it was wonderful. So books that really immerse me in somewhere different. And I suppose the other, like a lot of people, I think books were somewhere to sort of retreat to over the last couple of years as well. And I found myself reading kind of lighter books than perhaps I would otherwise done. Things like Away with the Penguins, which I just loved, which I thought was fantastic. But I'm quite a broad church in my reading, really.
Well, that's what we like to hear, because I think most of the team at Hampshire Libraries are as well. And actually, that's probably a good point to ask you about, the significance of libraries to you. Have they played an important part in your life, in your career?
Huge. I mean, I think, in all ways, really. And certainly, when I'm researching my book, I'm very close to the University of Sussex, and they have an amazing library, and you can go in and you can get a sort of guest reader's pass. And, you can, whatever you want to research, it's there. It's extraordinary. But even just local libraries, I think as a writer, it's quite an isolated thing to do because it is just you and your laptop. And the fact that libraries are just open, you can go in, you can sort of sit there and write for a couple of hours. They're great for that point of view. But more than anything, I think just that they mean that reading is open and available to anybody. And I think we don't value them nearly as much as we should. I think they're an incredible resource. And my sister actually works in a library, and it's the hub of her village. And, everybody's coming in to get books, but also there's like a baby and toddler class, and there's singing time and all that kind of thing. And so I think they fulfill a role, a community role as well, which is tremendously important.
I think you're completely right. We love our libraries in Hampshire for certain.
I think these, we need these kind of hubs more than ever now. And I think the fact that you can go in there, you don't have to spend any money, is more essential now than ever, I think. So I think they do a brilliant job.
What's next on the horizon for you? You said you're working on the sequel as we speak.
I am, yes, I am. It's all systems go, and that will hopefully be out next year. And I sort of slightly worry because the first book, all the loose ends aren't tied up, and that's because the sequel was already in the works. So I think people will finish it and think, oh, but I want to know what happened with that, this, that, and the other, and just have to wait till next year to find out what happens.
Always leave them hanging. I know I did get to sort of page 360, and I was like, but there's so much more we need to find out what happens. So I'm very happy to hear that there's going to be a sequel to it. Thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today, and wishing you all the best with the sequel. I can't wait.
Oh, well, it's been lovely to chat. Thank you so much for having me on.